Amanda had been anticipating the Christmas party for weeks. It was the most talked about event of the season, hosted in a grand house adorned with twinkling lights that could be seen from blocks away. Everyone who was anyone planned to be there. The night promised an abundance of festive cheer, music, and an elaborate spread of food and drinks. As Amanda parked her car and approached the house, she could already hear the hum of laughter and conversation spilling out into the frosty night air. A gentle snowfall dusted the ground, adding to the enchanting holiday atmosphere. Inside, the house was packed. Familiar faces greeted her warmly, and she quickly became absorbed in the buzzing excitement of the party. But something was missing. Amanda couldn't help but notice that Allison, her closest friend, wasn't there. She had been looking forward to catching up with Allison all evening, and her absence felt glaring. So she picked up her phone and texted her, asking why she didn't come to the party. Allison explained that her parents insisted on a family bonding Christmas Eve tradition and that she even attempted to sneak out, but they caught her. Amanda sighed as she thought about her friend. The party was everything they had imagined, bright, lively, and bursting with energy. She wandered through the house, chatting with friends and marveling at the lavish decorations. Glittering tinsel adorned the walls, and a towering Christmas tree stood in the corner, its branches heavy with ornaments and lights. The dessert table was a marvel in itself, laden with cookies, brownies, and even a chocolate fountain. The hours slipped by in a blur of music and laughter. Amanda was enjoying herself, but a part of her still wished Allison were there to experience it with her. The festive energy in the room shifted subtly when a man dressed as Santa Claus entered the party. At first, no one paid him much attention. After all, it was a Christmas party, and someone dressed as Santa seemed fitting. But as Amanda glanced at him from across the room, something about his appearance unsettled her. His red suit was filthy, stained with streaks of mud and grime, and his boots looked like they had been trudged through the woods for days. His long, white beard was unkempt and yellowing, as if it hadn't been washed in years. But what struck Amanda the most was his silence. He didn't laugh or engage with anyone at the party. Instead, he stood in the corner, gripping a large black bag and watching the crowd with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Amanda tried to shake off the unease. She told herself it was probably just some guy trying to stand out or pull a prank. But the more she tried to ignore him, the more her eyes seemed drawn back to his silent, looming figure. As the night wore on, the man didn't move from his spot. The partygoers, swept up in their own conversations and dancing, barely seemed to notice him. Amanda couldn't decide whether to laugh at her own paranoia or take her unease more seriously. Then, the lights went out. A gasp rippled through the crowd as darkness enveloped the room. For a moment, everyone assumed it was a power outage. Laughter bubbled up as people fumbled for their phones to use as flashlights. But the laughter quickly turned to screams. Amanda froze. In the pitch-black room, the sound of chaos erupted, shouts, thuds, and piercing cries. Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Then, through the dim glow of someone's phone flashlight, she saw him. The man in the Santa suit had pulled an axe from his black bag. He swung it with brutal force, striking down anyone in his path. Blood sprayed across the room as he moved methodically through the panicked crowd. Amanda's heart pounded as she ducked behind a couch, trying to stay out of sight. Her friends Matt and Kelvin attempted to tackle the man, but they were no match for his sheer strength. He swung the axe with terrifying precision and chopped off their heads before turning his attention to the others. It was like a nightmare come to life. The cheerful Christmas decorations were now stained with blood, and the once festive music had been replaced by the screams of dying partygoers. Amanda forced herself to move, crawling on her hands and knees toward the door. She tried not to look at the bodies scattered around her, tried not to think about the faces she had just been laughing with moments ago. Finally, she made it outside. The icy night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop. She ran to her car, fumbling with her keys as her hands trembled uncontrollably. She climbed into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind her. But when she turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. She tried again and again, but the car refused to start. Panic surged through her as she glanced back at the house, half expecting the man in the Santa suit to come bursting through the door. And then she saw him. He had followed her outside. His figure emerged from the shadows, his axe glinting in the moonlight. Amanda ducked down, trying to make herself as small as possible. She watched as he began checking the cars in the parking lot, his boots crunching on the snow as he moved methodically from one vehicle to the next. Amanda's breathing was shallow as she pressed herself against the seat. The sound of his boots grew louder, closer. He stopped in front of her car. For a moment, it seemed like he would move on. But then his head turned, and his eyes locked onto hers through the windshield. Amanda didn't think, she acted. She threw open the car door and bolted into the night. The snow was slippery under her feet, but she didn't stop. She could hear him behind her, his heavy boots pounding against the ground as he gave chase. Her lungs burned as she ran, the cold air stinging her throat. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear his laugh, low and menacing, cutting through the silence of the night. Suddenly, she felt a hand grab her hair, yanking her backward with such force that she lost her footing. She screamed, twisting and flailing, but his grip was unrelenting. In one horrifying motion, he raised the axe and killed her too, just like he killed the others at the party. When the police arrived hours later, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside the house, blood covered every surface. Decorations were torn down, furniture was overturned, and bodies lay strewn across the floor. In the parking lot, they found Amanda's lifeless body under a car. The man in the Santa suit had vanished. Despite an extensive search, no trace of him was ever found. The axe, the black bag, and the man himself had disappeared as if he had never existed. The only thing the police found was an eerie note left on a table, written in blood. The words were large and sloppy, as if done quickly. The note read, "Merry Christmas to you all." The night was serene, blanketed in a fresh layer of snow that shimmered under the glow of streetlights. Inside her quiet office, Claire sat at her desk, staring at the endless stack of paperwork in front of her. The heater hummed softly, casting a false sense of calm over the room. She glanced at the clock on her desk, 9:17 p.m. Once again, she was running late, and guilt gnawed at her. Her daughter, Lily, was waiting at home, undoubtedly wondering why her mother hadn't come back yet. The call from Lily came just as Claire was considering packing up for the night. Answering quickly, she listened as her daughter asked when she would be home. Claire reassured her it wouldn't be long, 30 minutes, maybe less, but something about Lily's tone stopped her short. The little girl's voice carried an unusual tremor, fear bubbling just beneath the surface. When Claire asked what was wrong, Lily hesitated before explaining. "It was him," she said. "He was back." Confusion clouded Claire's thoughts as Lily described the man outside her window, the same man she'd seen for the past 2 nights. Lily called him Santa because he wore a red suit and had a white beard. He would stand motionless under the streetlight, staring at her with an unsettling grin and waving in a way that didn't seem natural. Claire dismissed it at first, telling herself it had to be a trick of light, an overactive imagination, or maybe a neighborhood prank. But Lily insisted, her fear palpable. Claire's concern deepened, and she urged her daughter to close the blinds, lock all the doors, and stay in her room until she got home. The next 20 minutes were agonizing for Claire as she drove through the snowy streets. Her thoughts raced, replaying Lily's trembling voice and the eerie description of the man. She wanted to believe it was nothing, a child's fantasy fueled by stories of Santa Claus. But unease gnawed at her, growing stronger with each mile. Halfway home, Claire's phone buzzed again. This time, Lily's voice was barely audible as she told her mother that the man was no longer outside. He was inside the house. Claire's heart pounded as she demanded to know how he could have gotten in. Lily swore she had locked all the doors, just as her mother had told her. Yet somehow, he had made his way inside. Terrified, Lily had retreated to her closet, her small voice trembling as she explained that she could hear his slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. Claire pressed harder on the gas, the car skidding slightly as she rounded a corner. She could barely breathe, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The thought of a stranger inside her home, near her daughter, sent waves of panic crashing over her. Lily whispered that the man was singing. The sound was faint but unmistakable, the haunting melody of jingle bells, drawn out and warped in a way that made it unrecognizable. Claire's desperation mounted as she tried to keep her daughter calm, urging her to stay quiet and hidden. But then, Lily stopped responding. The silence on the other end of the call was deafening. Claire shouted her daughter's name, her voice cracking, but there was no reply. By the time Claire reached the house, her chest felt like it was about to explode. She flung the car door open and sprinted toward the front door, which was locked tight. Fumbling with her keys, she finally managed to get inside, only to be greeted by an eerie stillness. The back door, however, was wide open, snow and icy air creeping into the house. Tracks of slush smeared across the kitchen floor led toward the hallway. Calling for her daughter, Claire raced upstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Lily's bedroom door was ajar, and the sight inside made Claire's stomach drop. The bed was unmade, the room empty, and the closet door stood slightly open. Claire approached the closet, her hands trembling as she pulled it open. Inside, there was no sign of Lily, only her phone lying on the floor, its screen still lit with the remnants of their last call. She sank to her knees, clutching the phone as tears streamed down her face. The house was silent, save for the faint whistling of wind through the open back door. There was no sign of the man in the red suit, no indication of how he had entered, or where he had taken her daughter. All that remained were the smeared footprints leading into the cold, empty night. After a festive night filled with laughter, good cheer, and the company of friends, Jack was driving home from the Christmas party, the streets around him shimmering with holiday lights. He could still hear the music playing in his head, the clinking of glasses, and the sounds of laughter that had filled the air just hours earlier. The cold winter night wrapped around him like a blanket, the snow glistening under the streetlights as he navigated through the quiet, snow-covered roads. But when he finally arrived home, something immediately felt off. As he pulled into the driveway, the sight of his front door, wide open, made his stomach drop. He was certain he had locked it before leaving. Jack wasn't the kind of person to forget details like that. Cautiously stepping out of his car, Jack approached the house, his boots crunching in the snow. The cold air bit at his face, but it was nothing compared to the chill creeping into his chest. He stopped at the threshold, peering into the darkness inside. The house was a mess. Furniture was overturned, Christmas decorations were smashed or scattered across the floor, and the once cozy living room now looked like a crime scene. It was as if someone, or something, had ransacked the place. His mind raced. Was this a robbery? Or something worse? Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. Then he heard it, a noise coming from upstairs. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It was faint but distinct, the sound of something moving. A low, deliberate creak, like weight shifting on the old wooden floor. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to run and call the police, but curiosity and fear for what might be inside kept him rooted to the spot. Summoning his courage, Jack crept up the stairs. His hand trembled as he gripped the banister, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sound grew louder as he neared the top of the stairs, leading him straight to his bedroom. The door was ajar. Light from the hallway spilled into the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Jack pushed the door open further, his breath hitching as he scanned the space. And then he saw it. A figure hunched in the corner of the room, shrouded in shadows. It was twisted and grotesque, its limbs unnaturally long, its body gaunt and contorted. Its head snapped toward him, revealing a face that was barely human, hollow eyes, sharp teeth, and pale, stretched skin that seemed ready to tear. It grinned at him. Jack's scream tore through the stillness as he bolted down the stairs. His panic was so overwhelming that he nearly tripped, his only thought being to escape. He didn't stop running until he was outside, the cold air burning his lungs as he hid behind a tree in his yard. Peeking out from his hiding spot, Jack saw the thing emerge from the house. It moved jerkily, its head swiveling unnaturally as it sniffed the air. A low, guttural growl escaped its throat, sending a wave of terror through him. It seemed to be searching for him. Jack fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. He could barely get the words out, his voice trembling as he explained the situation. The dispatcher assured him that officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. From his hiding spot, Jack watched as the creature prowled around the yard, its movements unsettling and animalistic. It paused, tilting its head as though listening for something, before letting out another low growl. The sound of approaching sirens shattered the tension. Red and blue lights reflected off the snow as a police car pulled up to the house. Two officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Jack waved to them from his hiding spot, yelling a warning, but it was too late. The creature lunged at the first officer with terrifying speed. Jack watched in horror as the thing knocked the man to the ground, its jagged teeth sinking into his face. Blood sprayed across the snow, a gruesome contrast to the pristine white. The second officer opened fire, the gunshots echoing through the night. Each bullet struck the creature, causing it to stagger, but it didn't go down. Jack could see its twisted form jerking with each impact, its growls growing louder and more feral. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the creature slowed. It let out one last guttural snarl before collapsing into a heap on the ground. The surviving officer cautiously approached it, his gun still trained on the unmoving body. Jack stepped out from behind the tree, his legs shaking as he approached the scene. The officer called for backup and medical assistance for his injured partner, his voice steady despite the chaos. Jack stared at the creature's lifeless body, its grotesque form barely fitting into the black body bag the officers brought. His mind raced with questions. What was it? How had it gotten into his house? He would never get answers to those questions. The only thing Jack knew for sure was that he had survived a nightmare, a Christmas horror that would haunt him for the rest of his life.